Thanks for staying with us. Let's turn attention now to COP29 happening in Azerbaijan. Lagos State government has signed the Global Cooling Pledge at the ongoing Climate Change Summit in Azerbaijan. This move is part of the state's effort to achieve its climate action plan and resilience strategy. Esther Mokbariola reports.
In 2022, Lagos State introduced an ambitious 30-year development plan to position itself as a global model for sustainable urban development. This plan prioritizes key sectors such as transportation, renewable energy, and waste management to create a cleaner, greener Lagos. At this UN climate conference, the state took its climate commitment further by signing the Global Cooling Pledge, signaling its readiness to implement measures that reduce harmful emissions while supporting Nigeria's broader climate goals.
This momentous occasion will serve as a catalyst for achieving the objectives of our state's climate action plan and resilience strategy. It reinforces our contributions to Nigeria's nationally determined contributions and aligns with the global ambition of limiting warming to 1.5 degrees.
Cooling-related emissions driven by energy-intensive systems in urban areas are a major contributor to global warming. For Lagos, this initiative is a chance to lead by example, showcasing how cities can implement innovative climate solutions while improving quality of life for residents. Esther Mokbariola, TVC News, Azerbaijan.
Gogla's head of policy and regional strategy, Patrick Tonui, joins me from Kenya. Good to have you join us.
Thank you, Precious. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. As we follow developments from Baku, it looks like this year's global climate talks are all about the money needed to prevent the effects of global warming from accelerating. What do you make of conversations happening in Baku? And do you see any level of commitment from world leaders?
Thank you for inviting us to talk about this. I actually just returned this morning from Baku, and this COP was actually dubbed as the finance COP. They were really going to look at addressing this issue of finances for climate adaptation and actually getting movement on that 100 million that was committed in the Paris Agreement. And I think, unfortunately, while a lot of efforts are being made, there's a new report that was released by UNEP, actually, at the COP last week that shows that while the amount of money needed to be provided to reach the 1.5 degree target is about $387 million, the last data that they were reflecting is about only $28 billion coming in terms of this public finance that is needed. And they also showed that even the emissions at this point are not on track. So we are not seeing the level of money actually coming in, despite the verbal commitments, and also not enough in terms of adaptation or reduction of carbon emissions. So today, the report is quite sobering that we are not yet on track.
And the interesting or just mind-blowing fact for me is how China, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE are not part of the given class of countries. And China, for example, is one of the biggest emitters. Why is it so difficult to get China to give?
I think that's really a good question. I know at last year's COP, you did see some countries like from the Middle East commit to start participating in the carbon markets, not as development partners or buyers, as funders per se, but in terms of buying carbon credits that were generated from particularly Africa. But I think it's really a good question. I think that while, today the latest data seems to be showing, for example, that China has really come a long way in terms of solar and renewables, but in terms of supporting the most vulnerable, because Africa has really contributed, I think, less than 3% of of carbon emissions, but today they are not really getting support, really particularly also from the countries that you've mentioned, and it would really be good to see them step up.
So there are several issues coming up which are raising concerns. For example, the reparations for communities that are most affected by oil extraction and carbon emissions. There's also the issue of President-elect Donald Trump taking office next year, and what will happen to the stability of the Paris Agreement. Are you concerned about the Paris Agreement and what next for that agreement?
But I would even add the pressures a little bit, right? I think you mentioned the communities that are really affected by the extraction of oil and gas. But look beyond that. Across much of Africa, for example, every year, Mozambique and countries like Malawi, Zambia, Zimbabwe have been really exposed to what happens when cyclones come in and farmers are displaced, infrastructure is washed away. Look at a country like Zambia. This year has really been faced with a lot of drought that's affecting their reliability into their power generation. You come to countries like Nigeria, where the increase in temperatures is making life for people who don't have access to air conditioning and things that people in Western countries enjoy. The ability to live is really hard. So these communities are very much at the forefront, and they are facing the issues and the impact from climate change, but they really don't have the tools. And I think one of the sad things coming from the conversations for me is you really do not see a metric looking at the impact on communities, on farmers, the people who are at the forefront. We see a risk, for example, of lots of acknowledgement in reduction of coal plants and some of these other things which are super important. But I know particularly we as an industry focus on providing energy to people who don't have energy, and without deliberately also thinking about how do you impact those at the forefront of climate change? How do you provide a farmer with a way to pump water or to preserve their crops? Or how do you help them get back on their feet when they've had an incident or a climate-related incident? Those mechanisms today are not there. And even within the financing and the interventions, I think there's lots of room for improvement to think about that. We're also talking to a lot of people who are working with children who are affected by climate in terms of their health, in terms of their ability to even have education and be prepared for this, the 21st century. And there's not enough looking at healthcare, education, and all these other outcomes that are also being directly impacted by what happens to the climate.
Thank you so much for your time. We'll look forward to more conversations and resolutions from Baku. Thank you, Head of Policy, Gogla's Head of Policy and Regional Strategy, Patrick Tonui.
Thank you.